Happy Friday and welcome to Brainscratch here on the Lorden Arts channel. I'm John Lorden. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here today as we look into some interesting claims. It seems like a few times a year we'll have a family member come out and say, I believe that my uncle's a Zodiac killer. Or back when the Golden State Killer, before it was solved, we would frequently hear, I think my father's the Golden State Killer. Obviously, with the Golden State Killer, we know the answer there. None of those claims turned out to be true. With the Zodiac Killer, it's still a question, but there's so many different people that have claimed it, we know they can't all be right. Today, we're looking into claims, but these claims are a little bit different. We have a family member seemingly trying to do the right thing, maybe find answers for multiple people that have been missing for decades. But there's some details in this that make me want to treat it a little bit differently than those types of claims that we've heard about before. Namely, this family member is claiming that she helped move the bodies of who might be the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history. Is there anything to it? We got to figure that out together. Let's dive into the research and see what we can learn about this case. On the left here, we have Lucy Studey, and on the right, her father, Donald. Lucy is claiming that her father, for decades, was killing people, primarily women, on their property and having his children help him hide the bodies. This was taking place in an area known as Thurman, Iowa. It's a city in Fremont County. As of the 2020 census, the city's population was only 167. We're talking very, very small population here. What are the details? It really starts with this article from Newsweek. For 45 years, Lucy Studey told anyone who would listen that her father had murdered scores of young women and buried them. I know where the bodies are buried, she told Newsweek. And she's told it to them at the scene. She recalled how her father, Donald Dean Studey, would direct her and her siblings to help him as he transported bodies using a wheelbarrow in the warmer months and a toboggan in winter. He would just tell us we had to go to the well, and I knew what that meant, she said. Every time I went to the well or into the hills, I didn't think I was coming down. I thought he would kill me because I wouldn't keep my mouth shut. Now, from what I understand, in terms of siblings here, we're talking about 3 sisters and 1 brother, and this is the family that's going through this. From what I can see, Donald also married twice, and then I believe he had a long-term girlfriend after that, but that information isn't confirmed by a news source about the long-term girlfriend. The 2 ex-wives, pretty interesting information we're going to bump into on that front as well. But as he dumped the bodies into the well, they would pile dirt and lie on top, she said. Studey believes her father killed 50 to 70 women over 3 decades. He died in March 2013 at the age of 75. I think it's worth saying these are claims. Obviously, this is never going to be in a situation where we're going to see someone wind up in court over this. Donald isn't alive anymore. The question about, I saw one lawyer that was talking about the potential that Lucy, since she's basically admitting to being an accomplice to hiding these bodies, that maybe there could be some charges that come her way. But if she felt like she was in fear for her life, that would be a different situation. And you're talking about her being a child through this, at least a very, very, from what I can see, the earliest occurrence seems to be around, she's at the age of 7 or so, and then into her teen years. But one question I have is this first statement that for 45 years, she told anyone who would listen that her father had murdered scores of young women and buried them. For 45 years, that rolls back to the time where he was actually active doing this. So if, let's say she did want to do the right thing and you know, have her father taken away, all she would have to do is give enough details at that time to prove that one of those stories was true. And they have some accounts in this Newsweek article about different conversations she had with people. She tried to tell a teacher, or she tried to tell someone at school. They said some family things shouldn't be talked about. I'm struggling with thinking that she's been trying to put this story out that entire time and not having absolutely any traction, not being able to get anyone to look into this. And we're going to find as we go along the way here that there's a couple times where she does capture the attention of certain people. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. And honestly, for even the points that I have that are making me kind of doubt her story, there's other pieces of information that come into play that push me back to, oh, wow, this is a real possibility. But continuing here at 97x.com, one of her stories includes seeing Donald in 1976 or 1977. I believe she would have been like 7 or 8 years old at this time, with 2 other men. Okay, so now we've got some accomplices, taking a body out of the trunk of a car and hauling it to the well in a wheelbarrow. She told authorities that in 1979, she happened to cross a dead body near a cellar on the property, and said that he then took the body to the well, where she also saw another body. Her estimates, once again, range from 50 to 70 victims, which, you know, we don't have her actual statement to go through here and to try to piece this together and make sense out of it. What I would expect is that when she's talking to law enforcement about this kind of stuff and she's saying, hey, look, I think it's 50 to 70 victims, they're pressing in with some questions about, well, how are you getting to that? How many particular instances do you remember? And for me personally, I would really be thinking about what is the most detailed instance that you can remember that might give us some clues or some way to corroborate this story. Some very specific thing about a location, or maybe if there was a piece of jewelry that a particular person was wearing, just anything to try to drill this into, we can connect this to an actual missing persons case that we had open in this area. That's kind of what I hope that the questioning would be. Of course, that stuff probably wouldn't come out through public channels like we're looking at here. So it could be that law enforcement is hitting her with those hard questions and hearing enough to actually keep them moving forward with this investigation. Speaking of missing persons, first thing I thought about was, okay, well, we got to jump into NamUs. We got to look at the database here. We got to see if this even makes sense. So I just did a very basic search. Well, it's actually in the advanced tab, but I'm using it for its basic features. Missing females, date of last contact has to be before April 1st, 2013. We know that he dies in 2013, so obviously he's not going to be responsible for anything after that. In the state of Iowa, how many total missing people do we have that are actually registered here in NamUs? 28. Now, that number certainly comes with a little grain of salt in that I don't believe that NamUs is a full catalog of every missing persons case out there. The time frames that we're talking about here, we have her accounts seem to start in the mid-70s, and records keeping for those types of cases, maybe not the strongest. Like literally you're talking physical paper records. Do those survive to getting digitized? Does that digitized information ever really get integrated with NamUs? So could there be, not could there be, there is. There's definitely more missing persons cases from this date range in this state. But if we're talking 50 to 70, and for this state, even with this limited range set, we're only getting 28. Like you'd have to think that he's responsible for all of those and then a bunch more, you know, almost 2 times more on top of that. Or is there a different consideration here that we need to retune this search on? Kind of. What about local town? What's going on with that? Fremont County Sheriff Kevin Astrup commenting here. It's been a rumor around for years. We have a scene, but we don't know whether it's a crime scene. We don't have victims, bodies, nothing. But the sheriff said once the location of the well was finally determined, Fremont County brought in cadaver dogs. Both dogs reacted to something in the area. The well itself no longer exists. It was filled in some time ago. Apparently from other reports I'm seeing, this is an area that was developed on heavily. It was logged heavily, so the landscape has really changed out there. But based on what they're saying, she was able to take them back to the scene, said, this is the spot. This is where the well was. They brought out the cadaver dogs, and the dogs are reacting to something out there. They are saying that they have hits for human remains. His daughter said her father killed mostly women in their 20s who were sex workers in Omaha. So once again, we don't know how these details are coming to us, but obviously that changes my search here. So if we update it and we look at Omaha, Nebraska, once again for the same time frame, anything before April of 2013, we only have 9 results. Now, the thing about them potentially being sex workers certainly changes that, because their missing persons records might not be from where they were last working if they were actually working in this area and he was abducting them from there. So it does make this type of search extremely tough. One benefit that we have right now is this is a story going national. We have Newsweek writing about it. We have people.com writing several articles about it. I would think that it's already hitting such a level that we should be hearing from potential connections. Just whenever you have a body that has been found in a particular area, you will have families of missing persons reach out and say, is that my loved one? You know, my loved one was close to this. We want to know if that might be them. So I would imagine if you put out in major media, we've got a site where there might be 50 to 70 missing females from this particular time frame. Isn't one of the families or 2 of the families going to reach out? If they do, are we going to hear about that publicly? In some of the cases, we do. I literally bump into articles where it's like, this family contacted asking about this. Law enforcement said, we don't believe that it's that person. Or in some cases, they said, we have to wait for further testing. With a story at this level, and especially the coverage that Newsweek's given it, because they're really driving at this story pretty hard, I'm pretty sure that if they had any inkling about, hey, we finally have even a handful of missing persons reports that might actually tie to this case, I think we would at least hear that, if not the actual names of the people. Just 5 families have so far reached out asking about this potential site and if their missing loved one could be there. I haven't seen anything like that so far. But even if we add this number for Omaha to our search for Iowa, I mean, we're not even close in terms of the number of victims that we're talking about here. Sheriff Astrop said, we're going to do everything we can to prove or disprove that there may be a crime scene. Fremont County is working with the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation to determine the next steps. Digging at the site, not their first option. The cost would be somewhere around $300,000 for them to fully excavate that, according to the sheriff. Core drilling and other ground testing might be considered first. They drill just a certain diameter and then they could test the material that they pull up basically with that diameter. They could see if there's possibly DNA, human remains in there. Honestly, from my research on lye, that might throw some question into this. If enough lye is used, apparently it completely strips all DNA. There might be some form of bones that are left behind, but from what I understand, I don't think those can be actually tested for DNA. And the other thing that I learned about lye, which once again just is adding some doubt to me for these stories, it takes about 100 pounds of powdered lye to dissolve a body. 100 pounds for one body to fully dissolve it. If we're talking 50 to 70 bodies, like the amount of lye that this guy would have had to get, would it have raised suspicion? It used to be something that you could buy just kind of at your general store. Not quite where it's at nowadays. So core drilling or other ground testing, I'm thinking ground penetrating radar. I mean, based on what I saw about the decomposition thing, GPR might be at least able to pick up the remains of the bone fragments that are down there and then give them a better idea of, okay, we got to check this particular place. We got to do some digging here. Other cadaver dogs may be brought in to see if they react in a similar fashion as the first set did. Fremont County has no reports of any missing people in the area. So for this immediate area, nothing. And as of Monday afternoon, no one had come forward with questions about a missing person since the Newsweek.com story was published. So obviously they're thinking along the same way that I am, that the families are going to wind up reaching out saying, is it possible that my missing loved one is related to this? According to his daughter, Donald Dean Studey murdered 5 or 6 women a year over several decades. That's another thing. I saw an analyst speaking about this case, and he was like, well, she was going through this when she was really young. That's not what this story is. This story is that this was a constant pattern that was going on for decades. So she was getting older and older and older as these occurrences were happening. Even if you kind of roll it back to, well, she was 7 or 8. What type of detail is she supposed to remember from seeing her father and 2 men remove a body from a trunk? This is going on when she's 17, 27, 37. So there's a lot of other opportunity, a lot of different time. Why wasn't there ever a point where she thought, let me get a disposable camera? I mean, if she's really been trying to bang the drum on this since she was a child, like at some point you're an adult, you start thinking for yourself, you know, I'm at a loss for this part of the story that is, you know, I've been trying to bring attention to this for 45 years. That can't be possible. As of late October of this year, 2022, state investigators said they're joining the investigation, but it's too early for them to comment on the case. Astrop said he and his deputies began looking into her claims in 2021 when she contacted the sheriff's office for at least the second time to report that there were 5 or 6 dead women buried on the land her father lived on until his death in 2013. 5 or 6, not 50, not 5 dozen. So that's what was originally called in just last year, 2021. Why is the Newsweek article reporting that it's so much more? I don't know. Why aren't we questioning that, you know, why are her details changing so much? Like literally from within 1 year? Why 50 to 70 in particular? Like if you really thought that, why are you going to go in and report, hey, I think there's 5 or 6? Like, why would you ever say that? Why wouldn't you say, you know, there's dozens? There's more than you can count on both your hands. I don't know. I struggle with the discrepancies, particularly because I've been down this road of looking at stories where a person is making claims like this, and it really usually rolls back to just it's their words coming out of their mouth and there's nothing else to really substantiate it. But here we have her identify the site, we have cadaver dogs taken out there, and they're getting a positive hit. Investigators spent much of the last year attempting to find the well and get permission from the current owners of the property and neighboring properties to conduct searches. So looks like that probably slowed up their process a little bit. He said it's hard to believe that many women could have disappeared from the Omaha area, where Studey's daughter told Newsweek her father hunted for victims without drawing attention. But if some of the women were from other cities, he said he can imagine that it was possible. Just taking a look at a quick map here, we can see that between the 2 locations, not very far, about 40 miles. If we had 70 missing persons from Omaha Council Bluffs, we would have picked up on that. So if there is 70 people, they're not all from here, which is a logical conclusion. But of course also raises the question about if this did start when she was 7 or 8 years old, how is she aware that these women that are coming to the home are sex workers? Like, where does that level of awareness come from? Even if she was aware of that, how is she aware that they came from Omaha if they're not missing from Omaha? I mean, are we saying that she had conversations with these people? Because if they were just working in Omaha, they probably wouldn't say that's where they were from. If they were being honest, all of a sudden we'd get all these different locations. And she wouldn't be able to make this conclusion that they were taken from Omaha. So it's just interesting to me that we're getting a certain level of detail, but if you kind of scrutinize it a little bit, it's just tough to figure out, where's that level of detail coming from? Did her father tell her that? Like, how does it make sense that she came to that conclusion being so young and then getting older and older and older? I mean, maybe it's something that she had put together in terms of her understanding of the situation as she became an adult or as she started looking into this stuff. What about his criminal history? Is there one? Donald Studey had history of arrests. Lucy told Newsweek that her father made his living smuggling guns and drugs. Court records show that he had a history of arrests. Based on the charges I'm seeing, I'm not seeing anything that's really related to drug smuggling, gun smuggling. The Newsweek article does point out that there was like a petty larceny charge that he had from the 1950s. He got a DUI in 1989. And then for local charges, it looks really like a bunch of domestic stuff. Unfortunately, his record's not easily searchable online, especially since running his name now, you're just going to get a barrage of hundreds of articles about this case. But thankfully, Des Moines Register, who's done a lot of good work on this, did dig into their local records. So outside of the 1950s larceny charge, the 89 DUI charge, they're noting here, he was a troubled man who lived in remote wooded Green Hollow north of Thurman. Some 20 incident reports that the Register obtained from the Fremont County Sheriff's Office dating to the late 1990s show a history of violent and erratic behavior by Studey. They include threats to kill the son of the second of the two wives he lived with there over the years, and, according to Sheriff Astrop, an incident in which Studey, in the presence of deputies, shot himself in the arm. Apparently, he was threatening to take his own life in this incident, and then he winds up shooting himself in the arm. Chief Deputy Timothy Bothwell told the Register that at any time that deputies were dispatched to Green Hollow, it was a 2-car call. So apparently they had a history of going out there. A lot of domestic incidents is what it sounds like. At least twice, McKitty, who I believe that's actually his daughter's married name, told authorities her father had killed people and buried their bodies in an old 90-foot deep well. According to a sheriff's 2021 investigative report, McKitty told deputies she knew of 5 bodies in the well and had heard stories that there were up to 15. So we're hearing another variation here. That might still make sense with the sheriff saying that, oh, when she talked to us last year, she said 5 or 6 bodies might be in there. But Newsweek reported in an online story on October 22nd that in a subsequent interview with reporters from the magazine, she said there was 50 to 70. Why would that have changed like that? Where earlier in this same time frame, if we're talking about she's having this conversation in 2021 with her local law enforcement, at some point, Newsweek picks up on this article. She's talking to a reporter, and all of a sudden, now she's talking about 50 to 70. What's important about that number? Like, what if this was attention seeking? If that was the motivation in some way for her talking about this, which quite honestly, guys, I don't feel like that's what's going on here. Would there be something to have triggered that? Well, possibly, because December 31st, 2020, we have this report about Samuel Little, the nation's most prolific serial killer, dying at the age of 80. So there's a big run of news that happens right at the start of 2021 about Samuel Little. Now, Samuel Little actually claimed to kill over 90, but for confirmed murders, they have him pegged right around 60. I mean, if it wasn't for the cadaver dog's hits, I wouldn't even be talking to you guys about this story right now. Can we at least lean on that a little bit? Let's learn a little more from the original Newsweek article. What happened with this? Jim Peters runs Samaritan Detection Dogs, and he did that search pro bono. One of the dogs signaled likely human remains by barking, the other by sitting still where remains were potentially located. The dogs are Australian cattle dogs, or healers. One is called Jojo, the other is called Jetty, and they scented remains at 4 locations, with the last getting multiple hits where bodies might be buried. There is the odor of human decomposition in the area, said Peters. More work needs to be done to confirm that. I feel pretty good about what I saw from the dogs, but I'm not going to hang my hat on that. So, interesting that we have scented remains at 4 locations and the last getting multiple hits where bodies might be buried. So I guess there's different indicators for maybe here, but the 4th location, essentially the dogs are saying there's definitely something here. Even with that, you have their handlers saying, I'm not going to hang my hat on that. We need confirmation. You know, these dogs are used as a tool. It even goes into the science on cadaver dogs is somewhat debatable. I saw someone from the DCI that's working on this case also saying, hey, we've had dogs that have hit on the right spots. We've had dogs hit and it's not a good spot. And we've had spots where we found bodies that the dogs missed. They've really just had every result that you can imagine with this. But what does Sheriff Astrop say? I really think there's bones there. It's hard for me to believe that two dogs would hit in the exact same places and be false. We don't know what it is. The settlers were up there. There was Indian country up right there as well. But I tend to believe Lucy. Right now, we don't even have a bone. According to the dogs, this is a very large burial site. I really appreciate that he's being this honest about it and bringing up these other possibilities. There might be human remains there. They might be much older than the 1980s or the 1970s, and maybe that's what the dogs are reacting to. If that's accurate, then are we really in a place where we have Lucy just telling us a story? Be interesting if we can get some insight from some of the other siblings on all this, and we actually will before the end of the video. But continuing with another post from Newsweek on this, FBI joining the hunt. At least one agent from the Omaha field office of the FBI is in direct communication with the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigations, the DCI, and the Fremont County Sheriff's Office. They don't really say much more than that, just that they're in touch. At this point, the Fremont County Sheriff's Office remains the lead investigative body, and it's unclear what role will be played by the FBI. They might just be offering like other additional resources, laboratory testing, things like that. Or maybe they're offering to look through their records and try to find some missing persons profiles that match up with this. Law enforcement sources said the agency was watching the case closely and being cooperative. They might have been watching this case for a while. We're going to get into some more on that. Lucy Studey's older sister, Susan Studey, told Newsweek that the allegations their father was a serial killer were untrue. So we have another sister chiming in here. Susan Studey said by phone she believed the cadaver dogs that searched the property last week must have been fooled by animal bones, including a golden retriever that's known to be buried on the land, and the remains of a stillborn sister of Donald Studey, who was buried in a shoebox on the property. Both the dog handler and the sheriff said they believe the dogs had found human remains. The dogs are actually trained to ignore animal bones. I've always heard that as well, that the scent that they're trained for is human decomposition. It's very particular. It's not the same as animal decomp. The first time I've ever heard about bodies was when I talked to Lucy about a year ago, Susan said. My father was not the man she makes him out to be. He was strict, but he was a protective parent who loved his children. Strict fathers don't just turn into serial killers. I'm 2 years older than Lucy. I think I would know if my father murdered. I would know if my dad was a serial killer. He was not, and I want my father's name restored. The other big thing here is, according to some accounts, Lucy was saying that the siblings, her whole group of siblings, were made to be part of this, were effectively helping to move the bodies. Even in the weakest of instances that I can find, at a minimum, they were being told by their father that there's bodies out here, and they were helping to cover up that using lye and extra dirt. So Lucy's story is that the siblings were a part of this. We now have a sister saying, I was older than her. She's saying she was not a part of any of this, and she would have known if it was happening. Newsweek could not reach the third sister. As far as I've seen, the third sister still not talking. The brother also ended his own life when he was 39 years old. Obviously, we know Donald had made threats of that with law enforcement, I think several times. Unfortunately, it looks like the brother in this sibling group did actually end his own life. Lucy Studey has repeatedly offered to take a lie detector test. I'm not sure why that hasn't happened yet, and those results, like, that should have been done quick. Those aren't results that you have to wait for. We're already looking at this information. It's a little less than a month ago that this information started coming out. I'm just really surprised we haven't seen an update on that. Susan Studey said that the only time she remembers her father getting violent was when a neighbor ran over their dog and Donald Studey fought the man. So we have one sister that says my father is a serial killer. We have another sister that says, I don't know what she's talking about, and I was the older sibling. I was there. This didn't happen. In the comments here on this Newsweek article, and of course, these are unconfirmed. Anyone could put together a name and leave a comment here. We have someone else claiming to be a relative, and they're saying that, you know, my family member also told me that he was a murderer. I've heard it my whole life, which honestly isn't out of the realm of possibility. If you did have Lucy talking to other family about this stuff, it could be that some family is going to believe her, some family isn't, and maybe then that story gets passed along. But you've just knowing that we've got two sisters, we've basically got a family completely split on the question of, is this man really a murderer or not? And then we have the other implication around this, which is this guy, yeah, maybe he wasn't the best father in the world, but is he really a monster? Because the way he's being portrayed is that he's a monster, that this is a man that was killing people regularly, using his children to help him dispose of these bodies, and then in effect also intimidating his children into silence and making them be a part of it. On the flip side of all that, we could have bad information. It might not be true. And this guy, you know, a decade after he passes away, his name is just being dragged through the mud. It's really, really, it's hard to know what's going on with this. Deputy Sheriff Tim Bothwell said, Lucy told us in 2007, and we went out and there was only one well on the property. We get a little more detail over here at opiniontribune.com. In 2007, he was called to the scene of a domestic dispute at the Studey residence. It was then that Lucy Studey told him her father had killed someone and buried them. So that sounds like we're talking about one person. Her dad let me search the property, but we didn't realize this was off his property at that time, Bothwell said. It was hard because it was a family dispute at the time over some money, and he told me to just go look. He said his search 15 years ago yielded nothing suspicious. I believe this is the same time when her father actually accused Lucy of stealing money from him to the tune of about $16,000. So it's kind of rough because they're having a domestic dispute. They go out there. He's saying, my daughter stole all this money. And she goes, oh yeah, well, my dad has a body buried in the back. Like, it seems like she might have been trying to get back at him at that particular time. The Newsweek article does actually go into it a little bit. She does say, I did take that money. I've been honest about everything, and I'm being honest about this. I took it because it was the only way I knew how to hurt my father. I went back to Minnesota where I was living then, and I gave it all away. And almost as soon as we said the FBI is involved, we're seeing a comment here from Sheriff Astrop saying that maybe not so much, but they have been. He said that the FBI began probing over a year ago, but had backed away in the last couple of weeks. Astrop says, I'm not going to let it die. I'm just not going to let that happen. We've got to go with Lucy. No matter if they say it's not true or say she's crazy or whatever they can say, we have to look into it. We have no other choice. So a little start-stop, it seems like, by the FBI, except knowing that they were actually working on this case previously. And we'll hit some more details on that. Just when I'm about ready to completely shuttle this story and say this isn't even worth bringing up on the channel, we then have this consideration that's just it's another hard one to get my head around. But effectively, Daily Mail releases this article talking about his two ex-wives. One died by strangling herself with an electrical cord, and the other one shot herself. So we're now talking 3 direct family members that have taken their own lives around this person, and he himself threatened to take his own life, and maybe you would even consider him shooting himself in the arm an actual attempt. Many have speculated that Studey's 2 late wives were also murdered by the alleged killer, but police reports say otherwise. Basically, this article just says, the police have made the determination on this. They say that they actually took their own lives. According to Lucy, the 4 siblings did their father's bidding when he told them to go to the hills because they were terrified they wouldn't come back. Lucy said her father was routinely drunk and liked to kill women by smashing or kicking in the heads of the women inside a trailer. Another piece of evidence that obviously, 30, 40 years later is going to be tough to find is this trailer that was supposedly on the property. The Newsweek article also says that her comments are a little looser than this. It's more that, he shot some of them, he stabbed some of them, but the thing that he did most was apparently kicking them in the head. I can't even get my mind around this. She claimed that all the women had dark hair, they were white, and most were in their 20s and 30s, except for one 15-year-old runaway, and there was also 2 male victims. They were all buried, clothed, and wearing jewelry, with Lucy claiming that her father kept the gold teeth as trophies. Another potential for some physical evidence if this location of trophies could be found in some way. I don't feel anything for my father, nothing at all, Lucy said. I wanted justice when my father was alive, but he's gone. I just want for the families to have some closure and a proper burial. So we have 2 of his wives that pass away, and then we also get this other interesting consideration here at oxygen.com. Apparently this came from the 20 police reports that the Register had found that ranged all through the 90s and apparently into the 2000s. In 2005, he threatened to kill his wife, Anna Tordoff Studey, and his stepson, Dan. The son told the newspaper that his mother was afraid of her husband and he feared for her safety. She then dies in 2006, reportedly by ending her own life. Would it make me think twice about the rulings in those cases? Possibly. But this is all still hinging on some form of confirmation that there's something to Lucy's claims. Here at themirror.co.uk, it's reported that cops are going to dig up the land again. Now, I don't want to lean into this too heavy. I saw Fox also report this, and I'm not 100% sure this is actually going on. The Fox report was it had some information that I knew was wrong, and it was so bad that I just kicked it right out of the lineup here. But I did find 2 or 3 separate references to the cops are apparently scheduled to dig up the land, and most of the references were saying again that this would actually be a second excavation. And there is something to that. Remember I said that the FBI was actually involved in this case previously? Let's roll back to the Newsweek article and learn a little bit about Sean Smith. Sean Smith is a neighbor to this location. Him and his father own the adjacent property, and Sean grew up with the Studey children. He says he isn't surprised by any of these allegations, and he also remembers an odd call that he got about a decade ago, so it sounds like that would just be a few years possibly before Donald passed away. Out of the blue, this guy asks me if I'd seen cow bones or people bones in the well. It was Donald Studey. He told me my daughter is always hallucinating and making up stories, and she told the authorities that I got a body back there. Smith said at least 2 FBI agents inspected the well site more than a year ago and asked questions. Smith said the FBI had promised to return in August to dig up the site. Weeks ago, the FBI turned up and dug out part of the well. But what they found, if anything, is unclear. Knowing that all happened before this big push in terms of the media around this case, the sheriff now kind of digging in on this case, I'm really interested in this aspect that the FBI is kind of backing away from the sheriff in the past few weeks. Is it that they did pull some soil samples, run those soil samples, and just didn't find anything? It's a possibility. But just when you might be ready to call it a day with this case, 3rd cadaver dog flags remains at alleged Iowa serial killer's burial site. They bring out another dog, and that dog also flags for remains. The dog, a German Shepherd, hit along the morel mushroom trails Lucy Studey remembers venturing along with her father and family as a child. What does Lucy say about this? I'm not surprised they hit there because my dad said the bodies were the reason the mushrooms grow so big. We put lye on spots on the mushroom trail. So while I was looking into lye today, I did run into some uses for it that I didn't understand. I ran into like a baking recipe that included it for making biscuits or something. But I've also seen that if it's ingested, it could be extremely harmful. Obviously, if it's ingested in different quantities, I guess, than you would use for baking. I don't know if there's some aspect to lye being used for agriculture. I don't know, is it used to stop things from growing there? Is it used to maybe help how they grow? I'm not sure. If any of you are experts on that, please let us know in the comments down below. I just couldn't find enough information to feel comfortable really putting it out here, except to say that I did see it used in some very interesting ways and some ways related to food. So is it a possibility that he said something like that, joking with his kids? I don't know. Fremont County Sheriff's investigators met with state and federal authorities this week to map out next steps in the search. At least 3 SUVs from the agencies visited the site after meeting at the sheriff's office. A source said boring of a well where bodies might be dumped could begin next month. I think they actually mean coring, because that's the only thing that I've seen mentioned in the other articles. And we have the sheriff here. Let's go ahead and have him speak for himself about what's going on with this case and what their approach is going to be.
Maybe we would do a core drill, like a well drill, to see if anything was down there. Maybe that could be an option. It costs a lot less. But before we do any of that, we gotta find use our other avenues. We are actively investigating this, and who wouldn't? Who wouldn't? I would hope any sheriff's office in the state would, somebody come across like this would, okay, we're gonna investigate it, And I do. I wouldn't sleep at night if I didn't. If I thought there was bodies out there and didn't move forward to it.
I checked out the comment threads at Web Sleuths just to get a beat on how people are feeling about this, and literally, it seems like it's a 50-50 split. There's a bunch of people that think what Lucy is saying is true and needs to be researched out and investigated farther. And there's another group that says, no, there's no way. This just can't be right. But there's also another opinion in that I think is really important. And it came from well-known member Coco Mod here. Even if it turns out to be false, she may be suffering from an extreme form of PTSD from an abusive father. He may have made her watch horrible movies that imprinted on her brain as a child. I believe her, but if it turns out to be false, it doesn't mean she made the whole thing up for attention. I think it's really important to remember that possibility in this as well. I don't feel like this is the same kind of situation, and that's why I did today's episode. This isn't the same as, hey, I think my uncle's a Zodiac killer. We have someone that is dealing with something very serious here that in one way or another, she is seeing as her reality. And if it is the truth, that's a reality that's going to affect a lot. I mean, you can't even count the number of people. If those estimates on the victims are right, we're talking hundreds of people that will be affected by this. But even outside of that, on the flip side, there's still one person that's certainly affected by this. Seems like this is a family that's been affected. There's a lot of tragedy around this family already. So would you think that there's a possibility that someone might have something like PTSD around this? I would think that that's certainly a possibility. What I'm interested in is the timing of it is weird to me. The information changing from how it was reported to the sheriff last year to what Newsweek is reporting now about the 50 to 70, it almost makes me feel like, did some producer get a hold of this? Like, is there someone that said, hey, this is going to be a better headline, so if we could just get her to say this? Like, it's just so weird that there's such an inconsistency between what we're hearing from the sheriff that was reported to what's coming out in the Newsweek piece. I feel like a lot of these questions could have been answered before this information was brought public, because quite honestly, this still feels like something that could just completely flitter out and turn out to be an instance where, hey, you know, yeah, Lucy needs some help, and now her family's aware of it. Maybe there's something that people can do to rally around her and to help her through this. But there is still that possibility on the flip side. Like, you know, PTSD doesn't account for those dogs all hitting on that area. The sheriff making his point about, you know, settlers lived out here, Native American tribes were out here. He might have answered it there, but one way or another, I think they have to confirm it. And how do you do that? Do you go ahead and spend $300,000 when the entire budget for your department is, you know, $1.5 million or $1.8 million? It doesn't make sense. Like, I don't think they could function like that. So it's tough. I'm sure half of you out there are leaning one way, the other half are leaning another way. But in the middle of all that, we also have the name and face of Donald that has been attached to this and circulated through all these media sources. And I got to be honest with you guys, there's a lot of reporting here that is really not the best that's going on. There's images that are supposedly the home site that aren't accurate. There's a lot of really bad reporting that's happening with this case. So if you do look into it for yourselves, just make sure that you've really got that critical analysis on hat firmly, because it's easy to get off into the weeds on this case. Either way, I hope that this family can find a way to support each other through this with whatever the outcome is. It really seems like there's a pretty big split that's going on here. And it's going to be a lot harder for them to deal with this on either ends of the reality of what this is. I want to give a very big thank you to everyone that supports us here at the Lord and Arts channel. You know, we don't lean heavy into the YouTube advertising system, but because of you amazing people, we're able to stay here and keep doing these productions. So a big thank you to new patron Patricia Hawkins. And if you would like to help support the channel, you can do that over at lordandarts.com. Sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or buy us a coffee like Shannon Nishioka recently did. We really appreciate you guys as we continue into, it's going to be 8 years soon that we've been here on YouTube doing this. So thank you guys so much. Quick reminder, next week is a holiday, so there will not be a Friday show, but Monday you will still get a case cracked. Wednesday, another episode of Uncovered. Seems like a lot of you guys are enjoying that show. I'm very proud of it. So please join us for that and enjoy your Thanksgiving holiday. We'll be back on the other side of that. But I'll see you next week on Monday on a new episode of Case Cracked right here on the Lord and Arts channel.